This episode of the Capsule in Conversation is brought to you by Harrogate Springwater. Famous for its waters since 1571, Harrogate is Britain's premium natural source water. Hello, you are listening to the Capsule in Conversation podcast. I'm Natalie Anderson, and today I'm joined by Poppy Jay and Rubina Pabani of the hugely successful Brown Girls Do It Too podcast to talk sex, and probably more sex. So buckle up, gang, and get ready for the ride to join us in our conversation. Hello all, I hope you're all well. Now I am just going to put this out there from the start that today's chat is going to be a bit of a change, possibly a challenge for me, as I am a self-confessed bit of a prude. I know though that the two incredible women joining me today are really going to push me out of my comfort zone. As independent journalists and producers themselves, they have created documentaries for Channel 4, Channel 5, ITN Studios and the BBC, and have also presented on the BBC Asian network. However, it is their hugely successful, critically acclaimed and award-winning podcast, Brown Girls Do It Too, that has really catapulted them into the spotlight. Describing themselves as sex clowns and not sexperts, they have taken their personal stories of sexual awakenings and mishaps and shared them to the masses, breaking down barriers and pushing back against the stereotypes of South Asian women. With a live stage show naturally following suit, they are spreading the message that women can and do talk about sex. They are bold, they are ballsy, but mostly they are brilliant. It's Poppy and Rubina. Hi, ladies.
Hello, Natalie. What an intro. We should record that and just, wheel that around everywhere. People want to talk about us.
Great.
Well, as I mentioned, I am a bit of a prude. So, this chat is super exciting and equally terrifying for me in equal measure. I've actually put on high shoes to kind of get me in the mood. But isn't that...
You got shoes with what? Heels on?
Heels. I've got shoes.
Oh,
I would normally have slippers on doing this. But I was like, no, put your shoes on. It's all right. You're in a
bar with us. We're getting martinis. We're getting cocktails. I get it.
I mean, that is kind of the point of the podcast, isn't it? To get women feeling okay with talking about sex.
Yeah, that I suppose. But when we started, Natalie, it genuinely was to make each other laugh. Now, if you've listened to the podcast, Rubina is far funnier than me. And every time she talks, sort of intermittently, every 10, 15 seconds, I sort of do the machine gun cackle. It's a very specific laugh I have, which I won't try and do now. I'll wait till she makes me laugh, or you make me laugh, and then you'll hear it. But it really started out as a bit of a joke, something to do as a laugh, a bit of banter, like just funny. I mean, that was my experience, Rubina. I don't know about you. I'm just talking for myself here.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, look, we didn't, when we were signing up to talk about sex, we kind of thought no one was going to listen. So a bit of us was like, oh, whatever, we'll just say everything as honestly as we can because no one's going to listen. And the success is obviously because you can hear two people just being really super honest. And I think, we love that it's instigated conversations for other women to talk about sex. That's totally wonderful. And it's a real big benefit of it. But we'd be lying if we said we set out to do this heroic thing. We're just in it for a laugh, and we're glad that that's how the women find themselves, because it's helped us as well, just inadvertently.
Well, you said, didn't you? You said at first you thought that 6 girls from Bradford would probably be the only people that listened. And was that because, like you said, you just thought, it's going to be two kind of mates having a bit of a laugh. So have you been surprised by the response?
I mean, oh yeah, we've been absolutely floored by... Clearly, there's a public need for it. Like, Asian women have been starved. I mean, we just finished a run in Soho Theatre. We took our podcast live on stage, and me and Rubina are often sort of in the bar after our performance talking to women, and there is this real thirst and hunger for what we're doing. I mean, women are not just coming up to us saying, "You're amazing." It's like quite deep and overwhelming messages of like, I can look my partner in the eye and I don't feel a sense of shame and guilt. And, I can talk to my cousins about it, and I can talk to we did have a mum and daughter couple coming actually. So yeah, we've broken barriers, but the the support has been phenomenal. We were not expecting it. We really weren't.
Yeah. And also, like, I'm a big podcast fan. And when I open the podcast app and I look at all the thumbnails, I rarely have ever seen two Asian girls on a thumbnail together. And I think for me, that was like, oh, actually, what we're doing is kind of interesting, because I know the podcast market, and actually we're telling our own stories, and we're not some token Asian person on somebody else's podcast. It's ours. And that's kind of great.
Exactly. It's your story. It's your experience. And you've both talked about kind of growing up with relatively traditional upbringings and being more dutiful teenagers, and then kind of having more sexual awakenings later on in life. You know, talk me through that. And has that been difficult to navigate kind of from where you've started off to where you are now?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the truth is we're still navigating through it. It's not a finished story. And yeah, like, we both come from religious backgrounds. We both went to Quran class on a Saturday, mosque on a Friday. You know, we're from both of our parents are quite religious, and that's informed a lot of the way we think about ourselves and other Asian people and white people. And so we're going through a process of unlearning and still figuring out who we are. And sex has been a great way to just be like, right, I haven't figured out all these parts of me, but sex is like a really fun thing to talk about that we both enjoy talking about. And it's then opened up lots of other conversations for us.
And for you, Poppy, as well, you were married at 19 and then divorced at 25. It was an arranged marriage. Just tell me a little bit more about kind of your experience, and then as well going through a divorce and how that was received.
When I was going through my divorce, that I don't know, however many years, 7, 8, 9 years later, that I'd be on a podcast with this brilliant one talking about sex. I grew up in a really conservative household. My parents are very observant Muslims. I got married and it didn't work out, and it was a bit of a car crash of a marriage. And after that, I mean, I got divorced at such a young age, and I was at my lowest ebb. And when you're really at your lowest ebb, you really think it couldn't get any worse, and the only way to go is up.
Yeah.
And so I had a completely open mind, blank canvas, and I was ready to, because I hadn't had any partners or boyfriends before I got married. Then I was a virgin. Basically, I was completely inexperienced. So I thought I'd slowly built up my confidence and was ready to go out into the big bad world of dating. And then met my second, I mean, he's not my husband, met as my second partner, and we were together for 10 years. So basically I swapped a marriage for another marriage. And I've just now come out of that 10-year partnership, he was lovely, it was amicable, and I'm now sort of dating again in my 30s, which is great.
I was going to say, how are you finding that experience of dating?
Oh my God.
Because I've been with my husband a long time, and I hear, like, now from my mates who are dating, that it can be brutal, it can be hilarious, and in some respects, like the story she tells me, and when I said I was a prude, I am like, oh my God, shut up, I can't listen. She's like, oh, well, it was like this. No, don't talk to me about it. How is it?
Well, have either of you seen that the witch film, The Craft?
Yes, I love that film.
When they get off the bus and the bus driver's like, watch out for the weirdos, and they're like, I am the weirdo. Like, I'm the brutal one. Like, I'm the brutal one.
Oh God. Yeah, I can also completely validate that. Like, I was internet dating in my 20s and was like very, in your 20s, you're insecure. You're like, does he fancy me? What pictures do I put up? How do I show him that I'm Asian, but also white? So you're kind of in a lenga, but you're drinking a beer. It's like complicated. Her profile is just like hardcore. Every single picture is like a ducky face, and she's actually got a line. So good.
The pictures, they're hilarious. I mean, I am.
They're so good.
Because I see it as a joke, and I'm not taking it seriously. Which, by the way, I recommend every woman who's looking for a relationship or looking to date to not take it seriously, have zero expectations, and they will meet the man or the woman of their dreams. I am telling you, the moment you go in with like, he must read 4 books, he must have a double-barrel surname, he must work in this job, he must go on holiday here, you're screwed. So I am having a great time, but I appreciate women in their 30s who are dating are not having the greatest times. And I'm sure the novelty will wear off and I'll be bored. But right now it's a shiny new thing and I'm having fun with it.
And I think, again, the sharing of the stories, like what you've just said then, being able to talk about it and being able to kind of have those, oh, well, guess what happened? Or, and kind of we love we look as the sisterhood, we love that, don't we? We love being able to share stories, and it's such an important element of your podcast, the whole sisterhood idea. And whether the person is with you or kind of far away on the other end, just listening in, it's still a connected sisterhood. And you talk a lot about the role of women in culture, in your culture, kind of, and versus men, and having that connected sisterhood is such a huge running theme, I think, for your podcast. Would you agree?
Yeah, big time. I think, we've come from a culture where women tend to kind of like cat at each other a bit or talk each other down, especially if you're a British Asian and you come from the geopolitics of like Pakistan, India, about those conflicts and you bring them here. And so sometimes when you meet another Asian person, because we're always so tokenized, the natural thing to do is size up the other person, because you're like, well, there's only one space for one of us here. And that's so instinctive in our culture. And what Poppy and I are trying to do is be like, no, we can all be here. In fact, we don't have to have a seat at the table. We're making our own table and everyone's invited to that one. So yeah, it's really important for us that we're like repping British Asian women and making them feel like they're part of our community and we're all here for each other.
I think what comes across from your podcast is that yes, you are speaking to that community as well, but it's so universal, as in like all women can listen in, and all women are like either like me going, oh my god, like in between my hands going like this, going, you're talking about anal sex.
What were you oh my godding about?
Anal sex. You had a whole episode on anal sex.
Natalie, I have to say
that one was quite fun.
That one was even by our standards, we were like, oh my god, really? There was a line, and then we often push it beyond the line, and then there's like another invisible line, and that just blew that line apart. I mean, we were.
I was going to ask you that actually. Are there any topics that have, even for you two, been like you've been a little bit shy of sharing?
I think we always set out to be really honest, and actually there's topics that make us feel a bit embarrassed, but they're real, they're part of us. Like, if you're a human being, you're not just all light. You've got shades of dark, and you've got shades of weird, and you've got kinks that you probably want to explore. And we just want to make everyone feel comfortable in our space when they listen to our podcast, to feel like they can be who they want to be. Because I feel like that's so important. And so we try to be as open. I don't think there's no lines for us, because we're trying to just do something different.
And do you ever, either of you, because you are kind of, like you said before, it's a constant evolution and you are pushing the boundaries, but also for yourselves, do you ever kind of have a moment where you go, as you just said then, Poppy, oh my God, can I, tell me about a few other of those moments perhaps that have happened?
I mean, we have them I have them often, but I think it's so important to get it out than keep it in. And I feel like because we say too much, it allows for other women, we sort of give a platform for other women to also say what they've been hiding, or maybe they're a bit prudish, or maybe they felt that they couldn't tell their brown cousins or white friends or black friends. And it's, we had so many people saying, I now talk to my friends about anal or using a butt plug or whatever, because you guys talk about it. So I just think, yes, like Rubina said, there are things that even for us, we're like, oh God, did we actually go there? Yes, we did. But I feel, especially for South Asian women, we have such a tiny platform that if we don't take the mic and speak from our hearts and speak with humor, then what else is there to say?
And then we'd be wasting that opportunity. Yeah. The only thing I would say is like maybe we're a bit more hesitant. We never reveal names of partners we slept with, or we try to keep some anonymity with those people, because while we're happy to tell our stories, that doesn't mean they are, and that's really important to us too. So like we're very protective over the people we talk about, and we try to keep it as vague as possible. But those stories are ours; they're just also theirs.
Yeah, they belong to you. And kind of following on from what you just said there, Poppy, so in a way, I suppose that with the success of the podcast has come kind of a responsibility as perhaps like role models. I mean, how do you feel about that? Is that something that you take or feel a bit uncomfortable with? Because I know not everybody feels comfortable with a role model kind of tag, really.
It's a really good question. I think since the podcast has grown in following and we've got more visibility, there is this sort of element, I think, where it's interesting. Brown women don't come up to us necessarily and say, you're my role model, and put this immense pressure on us. What they say is, we feel seen, we feel heard, and your stories are relatable to us. So that's what they say, you know, seen, heard, and relatable. I think other people in the industry have thrust that role on us. And we always say, like you started off the podcast saying, you know, we're not sexperts, we're sex clowns. You know, every intermittently, we always give out some sort of disclaimer saying, don't try this at home. And we are not a monolith. We are two very different types of brown women. Yes, we're both straight, but, you know, we come from, we speak different languages. Yes, there might be a Venn diagram in our culture, but like Rubina and I are very different human beings as well. And for two people to take on that pressure for a podcast that's only 8 episodes per series would be ludicrous. But we try to get guests involved in every episode who come from a different walk of life to us, who can bring their unique experience.
You know, yeah, we shy away from that term, but the truth is, like, we're that role model that's like a bit broken and a bit damaged, and maybe that's quite nice. Like, you know, we're not perfect, and I actually think we should stop having role models that we think they are. We should stop putting them on pedestals. Okay. So if there's young people there who want to be a sex clown and they listen to us and they're like, yeah, that's what I want to do, great. And it's fine, because they'll know that we made a lot of mistakes and we will make a lot more. That's just who we are. As long as we can be honest about that, that's great.
I think that's really interesting what you just said then, that the idea and the connotation of role model is almost perfection, is almost somebody that's like held in like can do no wrong. Whereas nowadays we are finding, and I think with things like social media and people being their more authentic selves, and we're seeing people like real people, we're seeing the mistakes, we're seeing how people pick themselves back up, we're seeing their genuine stories, and people are prepared to put that out there as well to really take off like the facade. And so it's like you said then, there is that element of, I would say that you are role models, but not in the old-fashioned sense, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, we'll take that. Yeah, we'll take that. We have had people say, you know, you've inspired us to do this, and it's almost like I wish we could talk about what you talk about. You know, you two are it's fun. It's funny because I never saw us as being brave. Another thing that we get is like, you're brave, and I was just like. And my friend actually said, it kind of hit me after we did series 1. She's like, I would never do what you're doing. You are so brave to do what you're doing. And that's when I realized not everyone can talk about sex in the way that we do, because
it's a privilege. We have a privilege.
Yeah, there is absolutely a privilege. And I didn't really understand that, because I was like, everyone talks about sex, you know, but clearly don't.
But that's just it. They don't. And like what I said at the beginning, I don't. Like my grandma kind of is from quite a Catholic background, and that's how I was raised, like that. And it was like, sex is a dirty word, we don't talk about that, everything's whispered under your breath. So for me, I've always been like, oh no. And when my friends in our friendship circle have talked about things, I found it very uncomfortable. And then listening to your podcast, I'm like, wow, this is wild. And I've loved it. And I've loved that openness. And I think that absolutely that it should always be there, that openness, but it goes back to that sisterhood thing of hearing other women talk about period sex, you know, talk about that. I even did that then. I went, period sex.
I did actually just notice it.
I knew I did it a little bit. But it's just that thing of opening that conversation. And, you know, I'm sure for a lot of women, you probably are their guilty pleasure, that they will tap into you and listen to feel like they belong, to feel like they are part of a conversation that they perhaps couldn't have face to face.
Yeah. Like, we're Muslims, so Muslims and Catholics, they're not far apart in terms of like, you guys were whispering sex. We just didn't talk about sex. Forks flew in and like dropped babies. But we don't expect change to come overnight, and it certainly won't. You know, this has taken time. It's taken sacrifices on both our parts. You know, we get a lot of trolls for doing this podcast. People still are clearly scared of sex, and yet most people by and large have sex, but we don't talk about it. But I think it kind of, I don't want to use the word, it gives license for young women too, but it does give a sort of a, look, if we're talking about it, Rubina has this really funny, do the uncle thing, tell her the uncle thing.
I tried to say this thing, like, you know, there's that always like really weird drunk uncle at a party that's so weird that like no one could be as weird as him, so everyone else just feels comfortable. We're that drunk uncle at the party.
we're weird to make you feel safe, basically. And I think, you know, it's really beautiful to see where we've got to, and I don't know what the next few years are going to be. It might be other brown women taking on the baton. I'm sure I like to think that we've inspired, I hate that word, but inspired or encouraged other women to talk about sex in the way we are. I know we have, in fact, because women have been sliding into our DMs and saying that, but it's just really taken us on a very unexpected journey. I had no idea. And actually through sex, I don't know if you've listened to I mean, I know you've clearly listened to the anal.
Yeah.
As a training starter packet into Brown Girls Do It Too is pretty much the hardcore one to get into. But we do, through the prism of sex, talk about so much more. Like the podcast is actually so much more than just sex. It's about our identity. It's about growing up brown when everything around us was white. It's about sort of that intergenerational trauma that my parents and my grandparents had. It's the thing that Rubina was mentioned, you know, the geopolitics of South Asia that we bring here. And that we're a collectivist community, and there are some things that we love about our culture. There's some things that we find deeply, deeply difficult. Then when you grow up with religious parents and you grow up in a country that is sort of Western in its ideals, and it doesn't necessarily go with your Islamic values. I mean, there's so much to navigate, and we're still working it out. But we're having a laugh as we're doing it. That's the most important thing.
I mean, you know, like as you said, you know, you've also had a lot of backlash from the Asian community. You know, how have you dealt with that? Because like you say, you know, you're incredibly passionate, the two of you, about your heritage, your culture, all of that. So how has it felt for you to receive backlash in that form?
I mean, it's hard. Like, I really reconsidered doing the whole podcast after series 1, because I just thought, we've really put ourselves out here and it's not going well. Like, it's just not. And actually 90% of the trolls we had for the podcast were Asian men. And that's really hard as well, because you just feel like you want their support. They're part of your community. They're part of the, you know, they're British Asians, right, who don't like what you're doing. Or they could be Indians, actually. It's hard to know with the kind of geolocations on Instagram. Like, it did feel like that part of that community wasn't into it, and then it feels hard, because you're like, well, we're doing this for us, but are we, if you're not interested in it, or you hate it? So yeah, it's definitely tricky to navigate. But for every one horrible, mean asshole out there was like 10 wonderful women who responded saying that it helped them. So I mean, we kind of just do it for them, I think.
Yeah, totally.
And you know, what topics in everything that you have covered, which ones and which areas have gained the most response? Like, which ones have you had the most DMs about? You know, people walking up to you and saying, "Oh my God," what areas of the podcast have really got people talking?
The two that I can think of, one where we talked about being a race traitor. So Rubina and I are obviously both brown, and Rubina is with a non-Asian man, and I was with my ex-partner was white, and that got the debate online just went viral. It blew up, and I think a Bollywood actress in India actually shared it, and so it just did another sort of turn. And then we had this absolutely brilliant guest on called Seema Anand, who's an older lady and a Kama Sutra expert. And so I can't remember the name of the episode, but it was about basically the one thing that's not talked about in our community more than sex is old people having sex. Like, you know, like I'm talking OAPs having sex. Not that Seema's gorgeous and stunning, but she was, I think, 60 something. And it's just something that we don't talk about. You know, older women in their 60s, 70s having sex is just an urban myth. And so we brought her on, and that was a fascinating conversation. And that got a lot of shares and likes, and people kind of discussing and unpacking everything that we talked about on that episode.
Because that was another question I was going to ask you, really. It was about old people having sex. And, you know, because that's such the demographic that is not catered to hardly at all. Like, it's kind of, again, that secret taboo of older people actually having sex. And, you know, kind of, we've already had, you know, an incredible guest on already. I was going to say, do you want to push that boundary? Do you want to kind of build on that?
Oh yeah, we'd love to do more about getting older as well, because I just think your body just changes as you get older, and it's silly for us not to talk about it or think about how sex changes, how your orgasms might change, the shape of your labia changes. Like, your body changes all the time. And if we're always focusing in on young people, right? We're always saying, oh, they're all getting labiaplasty, pasties and they're all doing this other stuff, but what are these guys doing up here? Like, and if you're in it, everyone's got this long life. We need to know what's coming ahead rather than who cares about what's just happened.
Well, it's so important that you say that as well, because like we've done a lot of work on the perimenopause and the menopause on this podcast, and we talk a lot about it. And one of the areas that we haven't really tackled too much is sex during that period. But yet we know that women's bodies do massively change, and the sex changes. You know, we're not able to be all as lubricant and everything as we would like to be. And I love the fact that we're seeing more stuff on television saying if you've got vaginal dryness, you know, and it isn't, and it's happening at tea time as opposed to it being like, you know, in the middle of the night or whenever, because it is important that we do keep having that conversation, because as you say, it changes, all of it changes. Going forward, you know, obviously you have got the stage show, which is Mama Told Me Not to Come, and I do know you wanted to spell that different and wasn't allowed. Am I right in thinking that?
I wanted to obviously go with the CUM version because I'm a basic bitch. But they wouldn't allow it, so we had to do it the proper way. Our team up here were like, no, it's not gonna fly. So I was like, fine.
But we also wanted to call the anal episode butt ding ding, and they wouldn't allow us to do that.
That's brilliant.
BBC Sounds were like, no. I was like, all right, fine, chill out.
What can we expect from the show? Obviously, there's lots of talk, and also I love the fact that you, from the pictures, I've got to see the show yet. I'm very excited about coming to see it. But from what I can see, it's like you take yourselves on a journey from being youngsters.
So most people think it's just going to be me and Rubina on a sofa with spotlights doing the podcast. It is not the podcast. If you are expecting the podcast, it is not the podcast. God, we do put on a full-on show. You know, we are singing and dancing. There's some chat. We are candid as ever. We are very exposing as ever about our real life stories. There's some acting. We clown around. It really is. It's a mad experiment on stage.
Yeah, it's like if you gave two sex clowns the opportunity to do a circus. That's what's happening.
Yeah, minus elephants and rabbits disappearing in hats and things. That is effectively it. And it's kind of extraordinary when we were talking to the women after the show, they were like, we weren't expecting that. We thought it'd just be on stage, you know, like a panel talking. And it's like, well, we don't want it to be the podcast. It's kind of moving beyond the podcast. And actually, the podcast is very sex orientated, but the show is a much more sort of a 360 view really of our lives and our world. It is much more tame comparatively to the podcast, which is a lot more graphic.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, it's about our lives growing up in this country. It's the British Asian female experience, but our very specific experiences and where they intersected and where they were different and why we think it's important to talk about them, I guess.
And would you, because I mean, again, just from seeing the pictures and then hearing how you've just described it, would you consider like making this into a musical of some sort?
Oh my God, Natalie, you are a genius. That is such a good idea.
Are you going to do it?
I mean, I think at this stage we need to sort of.
I mean, you haven't heard us sing. We are absolutely shocking.
But honestly, the concept is amazing, and just how vibrant everything is as well. You know, like when you look at all of your set, and it's just so it just really comes to life. And I think hearing you talk about there's singing in it and there's acting in it, and I think at the heart of it all as well, your two very truthful experiences is it's a story. The stories that need to be heard. So why not?
Yeah, well, we might be coming back on your podcast. Yeah, Brown Girls Do It Too, the musical.
Promoting our musical.
Yeah.
Imagine.
I mean, we're sort of at the very beginning of this kind of live version of our podcast, and we're proud of what we've made with our brilliant team, and we'll see where it takes us. I mean, we've just finished London. We're going to be in Birmingham tomorrow, in fact, and then we're in Salford, Leicester, Brighton, Bristol, Nottingham. So
Leeds.
Leeds. And we're going up and down. Yeah, we're up and down and everywhere.
And, you know, kind of moving forward, what other strands would you like to see come from the podcast or a business, or the business, so to speak, as a whole? Because like you said, it's a 360 thing now. It's not just a podcast, is it? You've got, you know, your socials, you've got the show already. You've possibly mentioned there, Poppy, you know, other brown girls taking the mantle and moving it forward. What else do you envisage?
World domination.
Well, I mean, I guess for us, we're both completely like British Asian gals, so we're very Asian about this. So whatever we do, we want it to be really good. So we're not just going to run into writing a book or want to be a scripted thing or do a musical. Like we're just really desperate for each thing we do for us to be like learning something and pushing it forward. So this is like, we just want to concentrate on the show, and then what happens next has to feel like authentically coming out of that as well. We have loads of ideas, you know, like the dream would be a Netflix special if anyone's listening.
Yes.
That would be wonderful. You know, we want some comedy representation, and we suddenly feel like our podcast has taken us into this comedy world, and we love it there. We love being placed amongst that.
To have that true authenticity, that realness, that kind of, as you said, you know, making sure that product before you actually put it out to market it's there, it's proper and it's ready to go. And all these experiences, I am sure, like especially going on the road, that and seeing the audience's reaction as well, you know, is going to tailor make the next phase for you. How has it been as well? Because I know that predominantly you've kind of trained, and a lot of your work was in production and documentaries. How has it been kind of stepping into the spotlight as individual performers?
I mean, for me, it's been terrifying because I don't know how performers do this, because I'm convinced I've got a stomach ulcer. Because 15 minutes before we go on, me and Rubina always want to do a nervous poo.
That is such a thing. That is a proper thing. Yes.
I cannot tell you, like, it's just like, it's, you know, to perform in front of a live audience every night is just, I've never experienced anything like it. It's exhilarating, and Rubina and I, we will do anything for a laugh, quite literally. So when people are laughing at our every joke, we're just like symbiosis. We just love it. And you feed off of it, and I certainly feel like my performance is better because of it. And when you don't get as many laughs, or people are just maybe not understanding the material, or, you know, are listening, they like it, but they're listening, they're not necessarily laughing to show appreciation. You do get inside your head, and we're not trained actors, performers, or singers, it must be said. And so, but I think what I love about us, I guess, is that we do just throw ourselves in. It's like, well, you're not going to do it for the lols.
Yeah. And also, like, yes, we're producers, so we spend a lot of time thinking about story and producing and directing somebody and wanting them to say something in a certain way because we think that will enhance the story or enhance the emotion. And now we just get to do it instead of like directing somebody to do it or try to put those pieces in an edit together. We're doing it together. We're like, okay, great, well, I want it to sound like this, and I want the audience to feel like this, and I want this part to be funny. We just get to do it. We get to do all the things that we've been doing behind the scenes and just do it in front.
And it must be really lovely having each other as well, to have that kind of camaraderie on stage, and to know that if something goes wrong or whatever, you've got each other to lean on.
I mean, I cannot tell you, like, without this one, this is the genius right here. She is so funny. I'm just like, the podcast is mostly Rubina recounting an anecdote, me going, that's basically three series of what I've been doing.
No.
But it really helps having each other, because I think by and large we get each other. We agree editorially on jokes. We agree on things. Like, there's loads of things that Rubina has like a million ideas. Like, she'll pitch, like, we're like, yes, this works, and so we get along. And I think we go in there working our absolute hardest. But I also like to think I don't want to have any expectations, because anything that comes our way has sort of exceeded it already. But we are slight perfectionists, and we work our ass off.
Yeah, and it's so nice to share a stage with somebody that you know really well and you trust, and like also that somebody who knows your lines. So if you mess up, they've got your back. And that's been really lovely, because I'm like, I know whatever happens, if the worst thing happens, if we get heckle, if I forget my lines, if something on stage breaks, Poppy's got my back and we'll be able to do it together.
I mean, this already, to me, it sounds like such an incredible bonding experience for the two of you, for this journey that you've gone on together. Like the whole, you know, like I was saying about the sisterhood and the importance of those female friendships. Female friendships really are important, aren't they?
Yeah, they are, honestly. I mean, I've got a friend for life in this one, and there's an absolute innate, just like trust. We're like Jack and Kate. I'm obviously Jack because I die. But it's a kind of if you jump, I jump kind of situation.
Like paint me like one of your French
girls.
I mean, I obviously am the more perverted one, and I always sexual. I'm joking. No, there is. I think I really do think you've hit the nail on the head. There's a friendship and a sisterhood in my Rubina and I, but also from all the women listening, who have messaged us to say this, like, where were you when I was 16? And I always say to them, where was I when I was 16? We didn't have anyone. And like, even like just getting one message, I think is sort of validation for us. Like, I feel like I can sleep at night because we've helped one person. And clearly there's a need. I'm just BBC Sounds, they're doing a public service. That's all I can say.
Well, that's what I was going to say. There is a need. And have you seen anything from the responses that you've had that you now think, actually, we want to cater to this particular element?
I feel like I've become much more interested in in sex education. Somebody invited us to do a talk in a school, and I was like, that's what we should be doing next, because that's interesting. And
yes,
you can have an actual impact on a young person quite quickly. And also sex education in schools is so terrible. So what can we do that makes it funny, but informative, and like learning the right things, like learning the things that are important, not like your fallopian tubes and like spermicide and stuff like that. It's like about relationships, because that's totally connected with sex, and we need to be talking about all of it. I think that's something that education I've always been interested in general.
That is really interesting. We had Dr. Larissa Corder on this. She's a fertility expert on series 1 of this podcast. And she said, we don't talk about good sex, as in we talk about fertility, like you've just said, you know, the reproductive system, but we don't teach children about intimacy, the emotional like kind of side of sex. And we don't, and even as adults, we don't connect on that level. So we need to start that education much quicker, and getting you guys into a school situation, you know, and you're looking at that sex education where people feel like they could relate and listen to you, because the way that you deliver things wouldn't be like their school teacher. You know, you guys are fun.
No, but we'd have to be massively censored and no swearing. It would be a whole new way for us to talk.
But you've recently become a mummy though, right, Rubina? And so has that changed your attitude towards sex and towards talking about sex, perhaps like when your child gets older?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't even really given it too much thought about what my son might think about, or if he ever listens to it. But I'm hoping to raise a son who is so socially conscious and such a feminist that he would understand this was important, and to give him all of that information for him to make that decision himself. Because I think he's growing up mixed race. He's going to have his own things that he thinks about identity, but hopefully he'll understand that the British Asian community in this country, they don't get a lot of time. And they don't get a lot of space to talk about their stories. And that's why it was so important for us to just be as brutally honest as we could, because it's not easy being a minority, and it comes with a lot of other stuff. And I hope he gets that. But I mean, who knows? He might hate me.
I'm sure he's not going to. Like I said, I just had a massive argument with my 10-year-old boy. Like, just before I started this. And before I started, he went, I love you, it's going to be okay, bye-bye. Like that. So no matter what, it's all fine. It's all going to be great. But before we do have to finish up, I just wanted to ask both of you, you know, you talk about kind of self-love a lot. It's a running theme. How do you look after yourselves, and what are your go-tos if you're feeling like you just need that little bit of extra help?
I mean, I always tell people to masturbate.
I was just going to say, I
knew you were going to say that.
Natalie, if you're not doing it, you need to get on it. I'm just telling you.
Get on
it.
Doing it all in secret.
Get them away for the weekend. Get them away for the weekend, and then you can just, you know, do what you need to do.
Do your thing.
Do your thing. Yeah.
I think there's nothing more powerful than knowing that you can give yourself a good feeling all by yourself. And I know it's just as much as it is head as hand. Both of those things need to be aligned. I know that it's not just an instinctive thing. As women, we need to do that for ourselves. But giving yourself the time to love yourself is the best fucking gift you can give yourself. Like, wow. It's like, we're also time strapped. But if you take that moment just to be like, you deserve this, and I'm going to give it to you, and we're going to have a good time.
Baby. And what about you, Poppy?
I mean, I second everything Rubina just said. I'm still working out the kind of mindfulness and meditating because I find it really, really difficult to switch off, right? I cannot switch off. And that has been a problem for me for a long, long time. And I'm trying to kind of, especially now in my sort of late 30s, I'm like, right, need to switch off, need to do this, need to practice this. And it's hard, right? Because we're constantly bombarded with information. But Natalie, I cannot recommend self-care to your body. Like, you got to service yourself. And so that's what I would recommend.
I love the fact that you toned that down just for me.
I did. I'm glad you appreciate that I did.
I really, really did. Honestly, I did appreciate that. I have been quite hot. I was like, okay. And I'm quite proud. You know, we've talked about anal sex. We've talked about masturbation. These are big things for me, guys.
You did well. We're proud of you.
But it's so important. Like, we were on Deborah Francis White's podcast, and she was saying the same thing. You know, it's going to be challenging. And I like to think, I know on our podcast we sound a bit crass and vulgar and salacious, but we do it because for the lols. But with any, like, we don't want to shame anyone into thinking that they can't talk about it. And it's all baby steps, right? Like, yes, today you might feel a bit like, I don't want to talk about it, and that's absolutely fine. But tomorrow or next week with your girlfriends, you might feel like you can talk about this one little thing, and it's all, and you're just building your own confidence to be able to go into spaces and talk about your body, or not. I mean, you might decide it's not for you, and that's also absolutely fine.
I've loved it. Honestly, ladies, I have loved it. And obviously there is so much more to your podcast than it just being, sex. There's so many, it's multifaceted and so many different levels. But for me personally, I've genuinely loved this conversation because I have pushed myself to talk about things and to be frank about it and to be open. And that's something that I set out to do with this podcast, was to kind of, raise the lid on mental health and, women's experience in that particular area. And it's about being honest. It's about sharing our stories and about sharing our lived experiences as women. And I think that's what unites us all, isn't it? It's the fact of sharing those experiences that so that another woman feels heard and feels seen.
Yeah.
And I truly appreciate you both for coming to spend time with me today. It's been absolutely wonderful to have you.
Thank you so much for having us on. And I'm so sorry I didn't brush my hair for you, because you look magnificent. You've been incredible.
I don't like I'm in a cave.
No, you look great, Rubina. And
I'm in a hostage situation here.
Stop it now. You look beautiful. You look fantastic. We're all right, ladies.
We're fine. Everyone's all good. Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Now, if you'd like to get involved with the ladies, then you can catch them on Instagram at Brown Girls Do It Too, and also subscribe to the podcast, which is also available on all major podcast platforms. You can also check out the live show Mama Told Me Not to Come at www.browngirlsdoit2.com. I know that you're in my neck of the woods in Leeds on Saturday the 12th of November, so get those tickets, guys. Get them, because next year you won't be able to get them. There'll be arena tours and there'll be more amazing things. So get them whilst you can, because they'll be all sold out by the time these ladies are kicking off their next big thing. For more wellbeing, fashion and beauty, you can catch us at our website, www.thecapsule.co.uk. You can also catch up with our previous podcast episodes by visiting the In Conversation page and subscribing to any of our podcast channels and YouTube. Please do feel free to leave your rate and reviews and messages and everything. I love hearing from you. We all do. It's brilliant to keep in touch with what you're up to, what you're enjoying. Don't forget, you can leave us a direct message on Instagram at Official Capsule. I will be back next week with another very special guest, but all that's left for us to say today is goodbye. So it's goodbye from Poppy and Rubina.
Bye.
Goodbye.
And goodbye from me. This episode of the Capsule in Conversation was brought to you by Harrogate Spring Water. Bottled at source, Harrogate Spring offers a pure, refreshing taste with a delicate blend of naturally occurring minerals and electrolytes, perfect for healthy hydration.